Where are the sound settings? Oh. So this is like an indie game. I found a game jam. It looked pretty good. And it's in early access, so there's only like the first 20 minutes. It's only like the first 20 minutes of gameplay out. But it was like, why not? And I'm playing like Doki Doki Literature Club at the moment, and that seems pretty hefty. So I was like, I need a game to play that isn't gonna take over my life, like Dota and stuff like that. And no one wants to see me watch this. And no one wants to watch me play Dota anyway, because I'm so shit. It's hilarious. Right. I awoke in my desk chair. Across from me were his piercing amber eyes. They surprised me at first, but I should have known he'd be there. I stretched and said, mid-yawn, not very nice to sneak into a sleeping woman's apartment, but his stare just continued. I'm gonna laugh at him. I laughed at his glare. I'd seen San Francisco's shrewd thugs, hardened cops, and deadly Right, okay. I'd seen San Francisco's shrewd thugs, hardened cops, and deadly politicians, but none could ever match that gaze. I knew I didn't have what he wanted. Reaching into my coat, I took out my knife and flicked it open. I held the knife. Oh god. I knew I didn't have what he wanted. I read this. I held the knife steady while staring back at him. Look, I said, nodding towards the desk. That's all there is. Take it or leave it. But a detective knows when she's beat, and I knew then he wanted to search the place, and that's what he would do. I sighed, knowing my weakness for his type. All right, I said, let's look. He's a cat. Oh my god. He let out a gleeful meow in victory. I cut a piece of my apple that the cat had rejected. Always the sore winner, I jabbed, but I was smiling too, because I was telling the truth. There was absolutely no other food in my apartment. Man, you gonna starve. The cat often dropped by to scavenge. He made a lot of noise when he thought I was holding out on him, but right now the place was clean empty, no food anywhere. I had to prove it to him. I kept a small statue underneath the side table. It had been police evidence in a crime, and its owner hadn't wanted to take it back. I took a shine to it, and so I snagged it for myself on my way out of the apartment. Packaged cigarettes were the latest trend, but I still preferred to roll my own. The ashtray was evidence that it was a practiced skill, and I suppose I had a lot of free time back then. That lamp had belonged to my Uncle Lewis. He'd been a SFPD officer, one who argued policewomen could be good detectives, even while the others jeered at me. I knew he'd been right, but my current workload didn't help that claim. I thought about Lewis more often than I wanted. I was lousy at handling the emotions behind those thoughts. But he's your uncle, man. Oh, okay, maybe she just liked his uncle. She doesn't have to be sexual, you know? I'd taken copies of old murder cases from the SFPD records when I'd left. I loved reading through them, even though my own contributions were minimal. At that time, I longed for those types of jobs. The truth was, any work was hard to find for a female detective. This is pretty cool. I'm going to click on the cat last. Or maybe I should click on him first. A newspaper was flopped on the floor. Its headline about the death of Lenin, the leader of the Red Menace, sweeping Russia. It seemed that Bolsheviks had lost their head. The cat had waltzed into my apartment a few years earlier. He kept coming back, though there was rarely a morsel to eat. He continued his loud meowing until I proved to him the place was empty of food. My old notebook, now filled to the brim, I wrote everything down, even the minor details. Never know what can be useful. The second half had my current bunk, adultery cases, the only thing I'd get hired to do. Whatever my findings, my employers often refused to believe me. It was thankless work, but even that was hard to come by. I can't move my chair up, I can't read. There we go. Oh god. I can't fucking read here either. The regular white icebox, tinged yellow with age, half blocked the kitchen doorway. My income rarely kept much stocked in it, and right now it was empty. The door to the outside world. If I left now, though the cat would start wailing so loud I'd get complaints from the neighbours. No, he needed convincing before I could leave. Go on, talk to him. I love this art style. It doesn't matter how doe-eyed you are, cutie pie. We've got no food around, I told him. He licked his chops and looked at me. Apparently he still didn't believe that I needed to oh god. Apparently he still didn't believe that I needed to contradict him somehow, to show him something in the apartment that would prove it was empty of food. Okay. There were no cases just then, but the cat was mewing and needed attention. I had to contradict the cat by first talking to him, then pointing to a piece of evidence in my notebook that proved the apartment was empty of food. Show the cat there's no food. Wonderful. Evidence, icebox. Let's go. I opened the icebox so the cat could see inside. Empty, I told him. The cat looked quizzically at the open door, then back at me. Sorry, fella, there's no grub in there for me either. He stared at me with eyes as disappointed as I felt. Those big yellows always got to my soul. Thoughts of my family filled my head. My parents were still in Chicago, where they'd moved our family in my final year of schooling. I returned to California, but they maintained that there were better job prospects for my father in Chicago. So I sort of decided the story, I suppose. His alcoholism had cost him his job and nearly his life. He'd attempted to clean a start. Oh fucking hell! He'd attempted a clean start many times, but even the Volstead Act couldn't. Am I crushing something under my? Yeah, no, it's earphones. I don't care. He'd attempted a clean start many times, but even the Volstead Act couldn't to pry open the grip that gin had on him. My mother stuck by him, whether for her godliness or her stubbornness, I never knew. I always thought her berating only chased him to speakeasies, but it was the only way she'd known to love him. Most of their money came from my late grandmother's trust, but those funds were barely a trickle. I often dreamed of saving enough to help them. My mind spiraled into the usual series of questions. Had I even impacted the women's movement? Had I made any change on society at all? Was my plodding career worth losing traditional happiness? What was the point of life in the life I had chosen? A loud meow from the cat snapped my thoughts back into the moment. I took a deep breath and grinned back at him. Guess you can scram now, I said. Nobody's going to come knocking with food for you, fella. Oh, I like this cat. I'll keep him. There immediately came a banging on the front door. Beyond a nuisance, this cat was psychic too. You order out? I asked him. In the doorway was the regrettably familiar face of Connor Green. I looked past him, peering left and right into the hallway. I heard a woman's heels marching down the carpeted stairs, but otherwise the building was silent and empty. Evidently, Green had come alone. He stared at me ooh, I like that. He stared at me through the doorway with a coy smile. Well, ain't you gonna invite me inside? Do I piss you off? Because I don't like your face. Do I piss you off, or do I let him through? Because I feel like he's gonna come through no matter what. I let him through the door before closing it. Hey now, he said, looking at my apartment. You know this clutter might turn off some customers. Maybe not me, though. So that was his angle, hiring me as a detective. I wondered what a bootlegger would need of a private eye, but he answered without my prompt. I'll make this quick. I can take this to the hog house, or the pigs would laugh. What? I can't take this to the hog house, or the pigs would laugh me out, and other dicks just aren't as tempting. Dicks? Okay. His grin widened. Thought this was going to be quick, I said, and I started rolling a cigarette. It wasn't quick, and I'd already rolled and lighted a second smoke when Green finally finished his story. I noted the important bits in my book. It started with a letter, slipped under his door in a white envelope. The envelope contained a single typewritten leaf, which he handed to me. It read, "End your game, or we'll end you." It had no signature, instead ending with only a small scribble in the bottom right corner hand. Oh, fuck's sake. It had no signature, instead ending with only a small scribble in the bottom right corner that resembled a black hand. Green had a lead on a new rum-running scheme, a connection from Vancouver. He'd given a sample to Tiny Paul, the gangster who ran the Tin Spoon speakeasy for mob boss Jerry Ferry. They'd agreed to buy in for more. Green summarised the letter was about his rum running. He suspected Redstone Stable, another bootlegger, of sending the letter. He told me that stable ran a barber shop during the day and gave me the address. Green needed to know who the threat was from. He'd get Paul's gang to deal with them and continue his scheme to get rich. If I go snooping myself, he concluded, folks see I'm not trusting people. No trust leads to no customers. I need to play it low-key, which is where you come in. I raised an eyebrow and stared at him through the cigarette smoke. Something in his yarn was still twisted. He must have noticed my reticence, because he said, "You know I work closely with Lewis. I'm sure he'd want to protect me as much as any other victim." My uncle. Lewis had put me on the force to begin with, made me the first policewoman for the SFPD. He was the only one who'd let me walk the beats with him, or do more at crime scenes than comfort a widow. He'd been obsessed with helping victims and bringing justice to those beyond salvation. After he'd taken his own life, I'd quit the SFPD. There was little more I could do there. I started my own practice, taking his ethos to heart. Was Green worth my time? Would he be worth Lewis? Green had tipped off my uncle in a few cases. I wondered if that was enough to warrant my protection. Before I could think past my headache, he threw a bill in my lap. Keep the C-No as a retainer, and don't worry about getting in touch. I'll find you later for a chat. He walked out the front door, and I let him go. If he was willing to give me $100 with no commitment, then I wouldn't stop him. Bloody hell, it's a lot of reading. I turned back to the apartment, still confused about the whole story. My headache wasn't helping either. Whenever I lacked clarity, a trip to Southern Coffee was usually the cure. What do I touch here? Are you leaving, Count? Okay. I go out the door then. I mounted a gold plate on the outside that read PC Malone. Oh, God. Private investigator. Who? Oh, shit. What? I need to check something. What is it? Post Malone, there we go. That's why I laughed. Leave. I just ruined the atmosphere. Couldn't help it. I was trying to remember where that's from because I was thinking about it earlier, but I forgot. There was only one place I needed to go to clear my head. I like this art, by the way. It's really quite pretty. Southern Coffee was a basement dive. It wasn't modern, hip, or ever busy, and it was my favourite place to down some paint, especially in the company of the best bartender in the city. I gave my address and slouched in the back seat of the taxicab. I thought a good way to pass the journey might be to chat with the driver. We could learn something. He was young, not a teenager, but not far off. The redness in his face and a mean scowl told me he was angry. Don't much like driving taxicabs, I offered. He looked quizzically at me through the rear view before understanding what I meant. No, lady, I like it right enough. Just some bozo before you came was in here was giving me hell because I looked like the boy his daughter's went off about how my generation was ruining America. That scumbag don't know Jack. I'm going really northern when I read these because it's like the way it's written, but it's not meant to go northern. I'm meant to go like what's it called? What does it sounds like you know? I'll just get along with him. Well, yeah, I'm going really northern when I read this, but like English northern, like cheap shagger northern. No, that's Wales. I can say that I'm from the north. No one likes the north of England. I can live there. I can say it. I can live there. I live there. I can say it. I'm so tired. I can't even speak today. But I know I'm gonna go like New York. There it is. But I'm not. So that sucks. It sounds like you know more, I asked. I'm no genius, he replied. But you talk to anyone from the last century, they'll tear off your ear for just being young. How'd they get so high, I wonder, given the world in the 1890s, like a smooth running roadster? Then what they do? Bash it on every curb in sight, their greed, their war, their politics. Now they give us a ruined clunker, and they're mad at our manners when we grab the keys. I fucking agree, so I'm gonna agree. I agreed with him. The Great War was the hardest fought, at home and abroad, I said. The old men who put us there had some nerve. He replied hotly, and after those years, they tell us to get in line. It's a bum deal to me, sister. We're in the information age, and the news of the world is crap. They're just angry we can see their folly. The taxicab rolled to a stop. Anyhow, the driver said, thanks for letting me blow off steam. Have a nice day, miss. I opened the car door and stepped out. I like helping people. That made me feel better about myself. Southern Coffee was an automat diner. Ethel Burgess, the lone waitress, was friendly to help with any inquiry. Of course, if you winked at her right, she'd show you the way to the downstairs toilet, where Frankie played bathroom attendant. Oh, right. Southern Coffee had a distinct feeling of home. The familiar smell of mould in that old basement was enough to put a grin on my face. Can we get a seat? There we go. The bar stools were crooked and worn. My usual one was in the centre of the room. I could sit on it for hours if Frankie had a yarn to spin. Of course, the sauce helped keep me in place, too. Frankie had a bond with that old shaker at the end of the bar. I was surprised he hadn't named it. He could sling a mean drink, though he'd only use the good liquor if he liked you. Frankie liked me. It's good, we're not going to die then, which is great. It's another great one. The worn stairs led to the outside world. I grabbed the wine bottle on the bar and examined its label. It featured a picture of grapes and the words, sacramental use only. Frankie looked at me with a spark in his eye. Go ahead, he said. Give it a swig. I think if I say no, he's gonna be so pissed off. But if I say yes, there's a twinkle in his eye. So I'm gonna assume that's not a good idea. I shook my head. Too much. He scoffed and grabbed the bottle from me, turning it through his hands. I suppose you only like that bootleg paint. Well, I'll have you know that rabbies charge more than a nickel for this beauty. Only this type of Napa wine is made from that Zinfandel grape. It has a unique aroma. I've been trying to learn more about wine. Seemed everyone knew that stuff about but me. I noted what Frankie had said about the origin of the grape as he sat the bottle back on the bar. Since when do you know grapes? I chided. Frankie let out a bellied laugh. Some of those grapes are older than you, Malone, and I've known about them since I was a small tot. It's why I'm so good at my job, you know, Frankie sighed. Too bad more folks can't taste them. That woman's league is the devil. The Women's Christian Temperance Union was now under feminist Frances Willard, a positive force for the suffrage of women, but her staunch support of The Women's Christian Temperance Union was now under feminist Frances Willard, a positive force for the suffrage of women, but her staunch support of the prohibition, I don't know, along with the union's massive political clout, irked the very wet San Franciscan public, and she particularly wasn't popular with bartenders. Probably not, to be honest. Take a seat, he said. I'll make you something else. What? Let's go with that one. He was a fantastic orator, but knew when to be a good ear too. For my money, there hasn't ever been, nor will there ever be, a more loyal barman. So we like you. I sat at the bar. You got the spooks, PC? He asked. You're worn as a catcher's mitt. I suppose my exhaustion showed. I won $100 for nothing, and I can't let it go. I told Frankie about the case, and the threatening letter sent to Connor Green, how he assumed it was related to his bootlegging and his suspicion of Redstone's stable. The story took longer than I'd wanted, Frankie showing genuine interest by asking many questions. When I finished, he threw me the whiskey sour he'd been stirring. I took a large gulp and gave a sigh as a thanks. Well, Green's case is better than most of what you're given, he said with some enthusiasm. At least it's not more of that adultery bunk. Sure, I replied, but I started with a goal in mind. What's the point in helping a man like Green? Frankie clicked his tongue on his teeth. Lawyer or priest, why does it matter? Let me ask you, are the clients you have now the types you want to help? I admitted they weren't. I told him that I'd wanted more from my detecting life. It could be that Green's case shoots your career forward, Malone. I sighed and stared down at my drink. But my daze was interrupted by the basement door opening and slamming shut. A small, blustering woman began to march towards me. She was wearing a light blue cloche, I can't fucking read that word, with a grey ribbon tilted back on her head. A scarf of similar blue draped around her neck, but I was startled by what she wore under it. A grey trench coat that looked too large for her frame. It was exactly like the one that had belonged to Lewis. She hurled insults at me a while. All I could do was sit and take it until she ran out of gas and started breathing heavily. I set my drink on the bar and looked her in the eyes. Who the fuck is she? I studied her features more thoroughly. It was plain she was a knockout, but now that she'd finished shrieking, beyond the latest blush and lipstick, she had the natural soft skin and bright eyes perpetually desired by the opposite sex. She's a prostitute. While I was eyeing her, she caught her breath and restarted her tirade. I'm the wife of that bum who sneaks into your bed. Well, anyone can have that coat, mate. I'm not gonna ask that. I asked the cat, but humour wasn't her angle, and she launched into another poetic stanza. And he just left your sty this morning, she finally ended. And that was when I gathered she was Connor Green's wife. Miss Green, I'm a PI, not a homewrecker, and I don't think your husband in his line of business would want to bed a dick anyhow. What's a dick? Her look was pure incredulity. I don't fucking know. A woman in that line of work? She questioned. I don't believe it. Evidence. Connor Green had just given me a case that involved his bootlegging. I still wasn't sure if he'd be worth my time. I decided, oh, okay, right, fuck off. Paper strap, slam, notebook, Green's letter, statue. What she doesn't know about the letter, then that's a waste. Is the newspaper about her? I don't like her. I opened my notebook and flipped through its pages. You see, Mrs. Green, this is what I do. There's not much more I can show you. There's not much more I can show you to prove it. It still took more coaxing from her to believe me, but eventually she came around. She seemed grateful I'd explained it to her. Apparently she had seen her husband leave my apartment, and distraught, she had followed me all the way to Frankie's basement and decided to confront me. So she's not a prostitute. I suppose I lost my head after what I thought I'd seen, she said, and she began to cry. Frankie, ever chivalrous to a dimpled girl, came round the bar and held her up. Now that's all right, Mrs. Green. Why don't I hail you a cab and send you on back home? She agreed, and they walked together up the stairs. When Frankie returned, I said to him, "You turn night real quick." He snorted a laugh. "Ah, hell, we can't have that siren in here. If we would torture yelling like that, every street bugger would come here to her rescue." Mrs. Green is a torch singer? Well, I learned she was Mrs. Connor Green just now, when she came in here. I'd only seen her as little Fanny, singing lead for the jazz band at the Tin Spoon. The Tin Spoon, I said. Tiny Paul's joint. That's where Green is selling his liquor. Say, you think that's where she met her husband? I laughed. You're the real sleuth, Frankie. He made a sarcastic bow. I shook my head. You're telling me you escorted our little torturer out just to avoid a bit of hot water? Frankie flushed and said, "What are you talking about, Malone?" I was never good with emotions, but it was plain that Frankie had instantly fallen for the girl. So what if I had more to squeeze out of her? So what if I had more to squeeze out of her? I asked. What more could you possibly want from little Fanny? She can't have anything to do with Green's mess. She could. She could. But I don't know if I should contradict her or not. Because that's going to upset him, but I want to know. Oh, God. I don't know. Evidence. What did Green's letter say? Oh, he could tell us where that hand's from. Can anyone tell me where that fucking hand's from, please? How does that prove she knows anything? Frankie asked. He was right. It didn't. I don't see how Miss Green's relate to any of this. How does that prove she knows? Oh, fucking hell, don't. Considering Frankie's point, maybe she was unrelated to this case. I shrugged and stood up from the bar stool. I need someone to tell me who that hand is. What had just happened was quite the ruckus. It seemed like my cue to move along. Let's go, lass. Once I'd asked Frankie to lend me some cash from that register, he growled so fierce that I decided not to ask again. I didn't think his employers would notice before I got it back, but maybe he just wanted to save me from myself. Let's leave, lass. I was heading up the stairs when Frankie called after me. So what are you going to do? Well, I have to go for her because, my parents don't really have anything to do about this. I'm thinking about little Fanny. I suppose little Fanny. Right, okay, can I just point out, right? Fanny in Britain around here means vagina. So, a little funny. I suppose even mobsters had people who cared about them. She'd be wearing Lewis's old jacket, so perhaps Green and Lewis had been closer than I'd realised. I guess I'll take Connor Green's bait, I replied. I've got nothing better on the stove, and he might need the help. Something still stinks, though. Well, what's your plan? Frankie asked. The way I see it, I have 3 goals right now. Green hired me for a job, find the guy who wrote the letter. That's the basic part. But you want more? Asked Frankie. I nodded. Green's a shady character. I have to learn about him. Who is this guy? Dig in his past. I can't go back to him blind. And then there's something about his bootlegging. How'd Green get a connection like that with his source? What's his source exactly? Squeezing that lemon might give me more juice. That sounds all right, he replied. So where is it you were off to? I got 3 leads. That bootlegger stable, who Green claims sent him the letter, the Tin Spoon Lounge, where I might learn more about Green's running schemes, and Mrs. Green, who could give me more dirt on her husband. Frankie nodded his approval. Well, if you're ever stuck, come back and see me. You can never solve anything without talking it over. I smiled and went up the stairs. I was debating where to go next. Green had suspected Redstone Stable of sending him that letter. Apparently Stable owned a barber shop in the financial district. I figured there would be no harm in asking Stable. Oh, don't ask him about it directly, but let's go. I entered a taxicab driven by an old man with a moustache. He turned to me with eyes that had a playful glint. Sorry, he said in a rough voice. This is the end of the demo. I can't take you any further. I didn't know exactly what he meant, but something in that gaze made me understand. Now, if you'll keep your eye out for a full release, that'll be swell, he continued, but for now, please exit the main menu. I nodded and went my way. That's pretty good, actually. Of course, the full game is out on February the 8th or the 18th. It's either the 8th or the 18th. I don't know, I'll put something in there about that. That's A Case of Distrust. It's a really good art style. I really like that one.